In his annual news conference, Russian President Vladimir Putin answered questions on domestic and foreign policy. He answered more than 30 questions from Russian and foreign journalists during the 3-hour event. During this portion of the event, President Putin addresses Russia's tense relationship with Turkey following the downing of a Russian jet. He also touched on the state of the Russian economy, military operations in Syria, and the U.S. presidential election. This 75-minute portion from Moscow is courtesy of English-language news channel RT.
Colleagues, friends, we regularly meet at the end of the year. This year, just recently, we had the State of the Nation address, and I really don't know what else to tell you. In addition to what I already said there, I guess all the key things have been mentioned, but still, of course, there are issues that require clarification on our part, and when I say on our part, I mean myself and my colleagues, the President's office, the government of the Russian Federation. So let's start specifically with your questions straight away.
Last year, we paved the way for a very good tradition. We started with a question from one of the most experienced reporters, Mr. Terehov, but we also have Alexander Gamov from Komsomolskaya Pravda. I'd like to give the floor to him right now. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Putin, for the 11th conference, the 11th Q&A. I studied the verbatim report of the previous press conference, and we discussed the difficult situation in the Russian economy, and we asked you how long it will take to overcome this challenging situation. And you say that in the worst-case scenario, we would need about 2 years. Quote unquote. So it must be the end of 2016, the beginning of 2017, according to your estimate. Now, has your mood changed? Have your projections changed about the end of crisis? Because, you know, the situation in the country is very difficult, and I'm sure you're well aware of that. Now, what's your next forecast? Alexander Gamov, Komsomolskaya Pravda. We also have a website and a radio station. Thank you.
First of all, I'll tell you an old joke. Two guys meet, two friends meet, so one says, "Oh, how are you doing?" Well, the other one says, "It's like black and white patches. What's the current pitch? Black." And they meet again 6 months later. So what's the current pitch? It's black. You said black was the last time. No, that turned out to be white, and it's black now. So that's kind of like the situation we are in today. When we talked last time and we discussed our plans for the future and what we were going to do to come out of the crisis, what our prospects were, we knew that, unfortunately, our economy depended a lot on external factors, specifically traditional commodity exports, prices, oil, gas. Everything, fertilizers, it all depends very much on oil and gas prices, and we expected that the average oil price will be $100 a barrel. This was in early 2014, and all our estimates were based on this figure. All the macroeconomic parameters, revenues, expenditures, social programs, and the Economic Development Ministry used these parameters for their forecasts. Late last year, we had to re-estimate all those figures because the price fell by 50%. Instead of $100 a barrel, it was $50 a barrel. And our budget for the next year was based on this figure. And this figure sounds very optimistic today. What's the current price? $38 a barrel, right? So I guess we'll have to make some further adjustments. Still, I would like to use your question to demonstrate what we have come to. Of course, after prices for fuel dropped, this affected other figures, other indicators. GDP dropped by 3.7% as of December 7. The inflation rate is 12.3%. This is important because I guess there will be other questions regarding our prospects and our situation today. So, to understand all these matters, you have to be aware of these figures. Our real incomes have dropped. Capital investment dropped over the 9 months by 5.7%. At the same time, we know that on the whole, the Russian economy has come out of the crisis, or rather has passed the lowest point of the crisis, and we see some indications of stabilization in the economy. In September and October, GDP grew by 0.3 to 0.1%. From last month. And since May, production output has stopped dropping, and there was a slight growth, 0.2, 0.1%. In the Far East, actually, production output grew by 3.1%. We also see some positive trends in agriculture. There will be at least 3% growth. And this means that the support we've been providing for agriculture works. Grain crops exceeded 100 million tons, so 103.4. This is very good result. I'd like to thank our farmers for their work. The situation on the labor market is stable. Unemployment is about 5.6%. We know that if we look back at 2008, this is a positive trend. Also, trade surplus grew, the trade turnover has dropped, but we still have trade surplus, $126.3 billion. Our reserves are $364 billion. This is still a very impressive figure. The sovereign debt of the Russian Federation dropped by 13% as compared to 2014, and capital outflow has reduced significantly. Actually, in the first quarter of this year, we had inflow, capital inflow. Tax burden, this is very important. This is this is related to sanctions. Of course, it might be good for us to have access to international financial markets and use that money. But on the other hand, having too many loans also has negative effect. So despite all the restrictions we fulfilled all our obligations to our partners, including international financial institutions. We pay all our debts on time, in full, and the total
не госдолг, а общий совокупный долг, имея в виду незаложенность
combined
финансовых
the
наших
total debt,
учреждений,
aggregate debt. This
предприятий,
includes
реального
debts
сектора
by
экономики.
our
Он сократился. И это, в принципе,
companies
положительная
and
вещь.
so on. This debt has
Как я уже
reduced,
сказал,
and this
и,
is something positive.
чистый
Like I said,
приток капитала наблюдаем.
We
что
actually
тоже
saw
весьма
capital
положительная вещь.
inflow. This is also very
Думаю,
positive.
уверен, эксперты об этом
And
говорят.
I believe,
говорит о
and
чем?
experts
О том, что
agree, that
инвесторы,
this indicates
понимая
that investors
реалии
realize the actual
реалии нашей
situation
экономики,
in our economy,
начинают проявлять к этому
and
интерес,
they
к работе
are
здесь.
getting
Несмотря
interested
на сложную ситуацию, продолжает
in
развиваться
working in
ИТЭК.
Russia.
Добыча нефти,
Even though
угля, электроэнергии
the situation is difficult,
увеличилась.
the
По
fuel
итогам года
industry,
будет
oil and
более
gas,
4,6
are developing
гигаватт новых
4.6
генерирующих
gigawatt of
мощностей.
new
Уже примерно
facilities
29.
will be
Это чуть
launched
меньше, чем в прошлом,
this year.
позапрошлом году.
20 have been launched already. Last year we had an absolute record, but 4.6 is also a very good figure. And in the next few years, we will continue developing this industry at the same pace. And this is also very important because this means that the economy on the whole is growing as well, and we have enough energy for economic development. Our infrastructure also develops, seaports and so on, received 19.5 million tons in addition. And the amount of cargo passing through Russian ports grew by 3%. What does this mean? Our revenues from exports dropped. Why? Because of costs. But since we have more trade going through seaports, this means that the actual volume of trade has increased. And this is very positive. We develop our airports. In 9 months, our airports processed 126 million passengers. This is 2.5% more than last year. Internal domestic flights grew by 16% as well. Despite the difficult economic situation, we continue our responsible fiscal policy in the 12 months of this year. Revenues were 12.2 trillion rubles and expenditures are 13.1 trillion rubles. So we have the deficit of 957 billion rubles. We expect the deficit after this year at the level of 2.8-2.9% of GDP. This is quite satisfactory for our current situation in the economy, more than satisfactory. To keep the federal budget balanced, we used our reserve funds, and this is also very important. Our sovereign funds at this point are at a very good level, 11.8% of GDP. The reserve fund is 3.9 trillion rubles. This is 5.3% of GDP, and National Welfare Fund is 4.7 trillion rubles. We've fulfilled all our social commitments this year, and we saw increase of population. This is a very good indicator. This means that people can plan their family, have children, and I'm very happy. The maternal benefit program, we have 6.5 million Russian families who have received the maternity benefit. And as you know, we've extended the maternity benefit program. In 2016, the maternity benefit will stay at the same level as in 2015, 453,000 rubles. In most provinces, we've provided the sufficient number of kindergartens. 97% of the amount needed. Life expectancy at the end of this year will be over 71 years. We've fulfilled our commitments on pension indexing based on 2014 inflation rates, increasing pensions by 11.4%. Social pensions have been increased by 10.3%. And you started by asking me about the situation last year and what we expect in the near future. Well, considering all this, the situation with the export prices, at this point, the government expects that the economy will begin to grow at 0.7% rate in 2016. Then in 2017, we'll have 1.9% growth, and in 2018, we'll have 2.4% growth. I'd like to point out that all these figures are based on the oil price of $50 a barrel. The oil price is lower at the moment, but it's very volatile. So we don't want to adjust our forecasts and recalculate them, because this will reduce funding for social programs and the real sector. But of course, the government prepares scenarios for all kinds of situations. The government has to have all those plans available to them, and they have to be ready for any kind of scenario. Of course, our reserves for GDP growth are not limited to exports. Like I said in the State of the Nation address, we need import substitution. Of course, this is not a cure-all, but this will help many companies modernize, use modern equipment, which will increase their productivity. And of course, we have to continue enhancing our administrative mechanisms in the economy. We have to create attractive environment for businesses. We need to support companies in their work. So this is what we are going to focus on. So thank you for your question. It gave me an opportunity to use all these materials I had prepared.
Another question from a Kremlin pool reporter. Lena Glushakova, RIA Novosti news agency. Mr. Putin, you said we passed the low in the economy, but the situation in the economy is still very challenging. Mr. Kudrin has urged reforms. And this was echoed by your ombudsman for entrepreneurs, Boris Titov. He said that the policy rate of the central bank is too high, and our entrepreneurs cannot get loans abroad, and they don't have access to the borrowing here. And we might have the same model as in Venezuela, when they have the shadow economy exchange rate and the official exchange rate. Do you think that the policy rate of the central bank should be decreased?
Applause. See, you get a lot of applause after your question. Of course, everybody is worried about this, and everybody wants the interest rate of the central bank to be lower. And as we all know, commercial banks also use it as a reference in issuing loans to companies. But actually, this is not the only factor, but it is important. And Boris Titov, he does the right thing. He promotes the interests of businesses, and it's very important that we have such an institution, such a person. The very reason I created this institution is because I want to be able to listen to different opinions, because it is so easy to get busy with your current work and forget about some important things. But first of all, I will answer your question directly. I support the policies of the central bank and the government in macroeconomics, ensuring macroeconomic stability. This is number one. Number two, even though we may want to lower the interest rate, we cannot do this in an administrative way. We have to look at the actual situation in the economy, at the structure of our economy. I often hear that in other countries they have different interest rates. Of course, they are lower. The very reason they do it, their problems are different, and their economic structure is different. We fight inflation, and they have a situation where they may have deflation. They have manufacturers who produce goods and are not able to sell them. This is their problem, but our problem is very different. For us to lower the interest rate, we don't need to fight with the central bank like, you know, they did in the planned economy in the Soviet Union. We need to help the government to bring down the inflation rate and reduce inflation expectations. And devaluation expectations. If we do this, then we can reduce the interest rate of the central bank based on market economy principles. And when it is possible to support the real sector, the central bank does it already. But we shouldn't push the central bank further, because this is not the only problem, but this is one of the key problems in fighting inflation. We may have problems with that. What does the central bank do in addition to supporting the entire banking monetary system of the country? And this is what it actually does. What else does the central bank do? It works together with the government on the so-called project funding programs, when the government has certain projects, and there's a great number of projects. It's tens of billions of, maybe 250 billion rubles, and banks provides funds for all those programs for commercial banks, and then they fund those specific programs. This applies to investment projects. The central bank is also involved there. So there are different instruments that the central bank uses, and I think at this point this is enough.
Next question, please. TASS News Agency, Veronika Romanenkova. Now, to be honest, Mr. President, are you satisfied with the work of the government? Are they taking the appropriate steps in a situation of a crisis? Maybe we could see a reshuffle?
No. You know, you've probably noticed over the years that I treat people very carefully, and I think that reshuffling the government, of course, not always, but of course, it's not always negative, but you really don't need this reshuffling all the time. If somebody doesn't do a good job, this is my responsibility as well. I think it is my fault as well, to an extent. So, there will be no major changes in the government at this. We think together with the government, we consider how to enhance its structure, how to make the government more efficient, how to help the government focus on the most important areas. And we have certain plans like that, but it's nothing dramatic. It's not just some personnel decisions. No. We just want to make the government work more efficiently. You also asked if I'm happy with the government's performance. On the whole, yes. Of course, they could do a better job, but for example, early last year, we had the anti-crisis plan prepared and we began to implement it. I don't remember the exact name of this plan, but essentially it's an anti-crisis plan. So when we looked at it, 35% of this plan was not implemented. What does this mean? This is more than one-third. Well, this means that in many different agencies, ministries, they didn't do enough to implement and respond to current challenges timely. But on the whole, strategically, like I said, the government works in the right direction and is sufficiently efficient.
Антон, Первый канал.
Next question.
Такой большой плакат. Как без татар? У нас без татар невозможно.
Меня зовут Елена Колебакина, представляю...
My name is Elena Kolebakina. I'm from the Business Online newspaper from Tatarstan, and I have to ask these questions. They've been prompted by the people of Tatarstan. In your address, you said that you shouldn't equate hard-working people of Turkey and the senior leadership of Turkey. You said that there are good friends in Turkey, and as you know, Tatarstan has had a lot of cultural, economic ties which are very strong with Turkey. So what do we do? Do we need to rupture these ties with the whole Turkic world? And Vladimir Medinsky, the culture of ministry, from the Culture of Ministry, said that we need to break all the ties. So what do we do with those investors who account for a quarter of all investment into the Republic of Tatarstan? And also have a second question. Starting from the 1st of January 2016, Rustem Minnikhanov should stop being called president according to federal law. But this could have a negative effect on the feelings of all the Tatars around the world. And you said that it's up to the Republic on how we call our leader. So will you insist on changing the title of the head of Tatarstan? Well, I saw another, someone else wanting to ask the question in Turkey. So I will respond to both questions.
Ну, давайте и вы задайте вопросы, и вы сейчас мы разберемся.
Anadolu News Agency. I have a similar question, and I also would like to start by saying that in the State of the Nation address, you said we don't equate the people of Turkey and some of the Turkish elite who are directly responsible for the deaths of our servicemen in Syria. But in daily life, the situation looks different because we have the Turkish embassy in Moscow receives complaints from college students who complain that they've been dismissed from their schools. Turkish businessmen complain that they're discriminated against. And one more question on Syria. We know your position on the future of the Syrian president. Russia says it's up to the people of Syria to decide his fate, whereas the US and their allies insist that he has no political future. Did you discuss this issue with John Kerry when he was in Moscow, and will you raise this issue again in New York? Turkish news agency Ceyhan. relations between Russia and Turkey deteriorated rapidly, and nobody benefits from that. Both sides will suffer because of that. Do you think maybe there is a third side, a third player who was involved in creating this situation? Recently, we know that an Islamic association to fight ISIS was created. We know also there is the NATO coalition, and then there is the Russian-Syrian coalition. So there are three coalitions to fight ISIS. Is it so difficult to fight it? Maybe there are some other plans involved. Maybe ISIS is not the problem.
Да, значит, мы про Сирию я попробую.
So I'll talk about Syria later, and I'll go back to the conflict between Russia and Turkey. We believe that the actions of the Turkish authorities towards our plane is not an unfriendly, it's a hostile act. They downed military aircraft and our servicemen died. What was particularly outrageous about it? If it was just an accident and the Turkish authorities tried to say that they were not aware it was a Russian plane, but what would they do? They should call us and explain. But then what did they do instead? They turned to Brussels and said that they were offended. Were we trying to threaten them? No. And they're trying to use NATO as a shield. Is that in NATO's interests? Actually, it turns out it's not in NATO's interests. Now, my message to the Russian people and to the people of Turkey, certainly it's a tragedy and people died, and why we were so offended, we didn't say no to cooperation. When I was at the G20 summit in Antalya, we talked to the Turkish leadership, and our Turkish counterparts said there was a number of priorities and asked for cooperation. I will not disclose the details, but they raised very sensitive issues for Turkey, which are outside of international law. I mean, the decisions that the Turkish authorities insisted on were outside of Turkish law, and we said, yes, we are ready to help you. We are ready to assist you in your efforts. Well, you know, I've never heard of the Turkmen people in Syria. I know that we have the Turkmen people living in the Republic of Turkmenistan. But if we indicated that we are ready to cooperate with Turkey on sensitive issues, they could have used the existing channels of military of cooperation between the militaries. Well, they could have indicated that it's in their interest not to attack these people, but they never said anything. As I said, we were ready to cooperate on those sensitive issues with Turkey. So I'm at a loss. Why did they want to do it? So what was their goal? Did they think that we're going to run away from that? Russia is not a country like this. We've increased our presence, ramped up the number of aircraft, and now we have an S-400 anti-aircraft defense system. And we're now improving the Syrian anti-aircraft system, the Buk systems. Turkey used to violate the Syrian airspace continuously. Well, they're fine now. So the big question is why? So you asked about a third party. Well, there might I get your hint, but we are not aware of that. But if someone in the Turkish leadership wanted to lick someone boots in the someone else's, the American leadership. Well, it's up to them. Maybe they had an agreement, a tacit agreement, that we will down the Russian plane and you will turn a blind eye to us invading part of Iraq and occupying a part of Iraq. Maybe they had an agreement like that. We're not aware of that. But in any way, they created this kind of entanglement. And from the analysis that I've made, I believe that ISIS is a secondary issue right now. So I'd like to share my observations with you. Earlier, you know, Iraq was invaded and destroyed. And there was a vacuum that followed, and we saw that there was some oil trafficking taking place, and the situation like that was there for years. And you know, oil trafficking is taking place in an industrial scale. And then to protect this illegal exports and production, they had to use some military force. And it's very easy to use ISIS. And he can use someone, exploit someone as an actor, as a proxy. So they started to recruit people and send people, and I believe this is the way that ISIS was created. And now they needed to provide for logistics. When we started to bomb convoys, we said that they only move at night, and they only move in small convoys of 15 cars. But most of the trucks now move via Iraq and via Kurdistan in Iraq. And I will ask the Defense Ministry to show you one picture. We've identified an area with 11,000 trucks, tanker trucks, transporting oil and petroleum products. So if there's a third party, as you ask, I'm not sure. Maybe they didn't get any approval from anyone. You know, but the Turkish authorities have been criticized for a high level of Islamization in the country. And maybe Turkey wanted to show the Europeans and Americans that we are Islamists, but we are modern-day Islamists. Like Reagan said about Somoza, he's a bastard, but he's our type of bastard. Maybe it happened like that, but anyway, there's nothing good that came out of it. Even if they had any goals, they've not achieved those goals. I'm now referring to the goals by Turkey. They only exacerbated the situation. Now going back to your question on Turkic people living in Russia, certainly you need to sustain ties with the nations that are ethnically close to it. Certainly the Turkic people living here in Russia are citizens of Russia, and I also said that we continue to maintain good ties with the people of Turkey, and they will continue to be our friends, and we need to maintain contacts with them. But as for the current Turkish leadership, it's very difficult or even impossible to agree on issues. And even in those areas where we say we are ready to cooperate, they would stab us in the back due to the reasons which we don't understand. So I don't see any prospects of cooperation at the state level. But as for the humanitarian area, there are prospects, although there's also some issues and challenges. And the Turkish leadership got what they did not expect, and will have to take some restrictive measures in the economy and in other areas, and this has to do with tourism, for instance. So Ataturk, would roll in his grave if he saw what was happening with Islamization in Turkey. We see that there are militants in Turkey, also from Russia's North Caucasus. We told our partners, we said, we don't do like that towards Turkey. These militants get medical treatments, they are guarded, and then they use Turkish passports to penetrate our territory, and then we'll have to track them down, either in North Caucasus or in our big cities. So that's what we'll have to do, just like taking other steps to ensure our national security. Now as to the title of the head of Tatarstan. Well, as we say, you can call a person whatever you want, but the most important thing is not to harm that person. Well, it's up to Tatarstan, certainly, but I don't think it will offend anyone. It will undermine someone's interests. As you know, North Caucasus people might get very offended by this initiative. But even the Chechen Republic says Russia needs to have one president, one person who is called president. Well, that was the choice of the Chechen people. We will respect any decision made by the people of Tatarstan. So it's up to you to decide on the title of your president.
Let's now go to Channel 1. Anton Vernitsky.
I'm very sorry, I wrote down your question, but I forgot. Anton, I'm so sorry. Now, on the future of the Syrian president, I have repeatedly said, and I will do it once again, we will never agree to a situation when some outside player would impose their decisions, would dictate who should be the leader. It doesn't make any sense, and it runs counter to international law. We discussed that with State Secretary Kerry. We maintain our position. We believe it's only up to the people of Syria to decide who their leaders should be and what should be the standards and rules. So, in general, and we'll say an important thing, in general, we support the initiative of the United States to draft a UN Security Council resolution on Syria. And the State Secretary brought this draft resolution. Overall, we are satisfied with it. And I'm sure that the Syrian authorities will also agree with it. And now this has been a years-long conflict. It's a bloody conflict which has claimed many lives. And certainly we need compromises, but the compromises should be made from both sides. So there are acceptable provisions, but it could be improved further. This was the initiative of the US. This is the initiative of Barack Obama. It means that the EU and the US is very much concerned over what's happening in Yemen, Syria, Iraq, and the whole of the Middle East. And we will do everything to resolve this crisis. And any solutions must be acceptable to all the sides. But the sequence should be as follows. We need to work together first to draft a constitution. They must set up a mechanism to mechanism of supervision over a future election, and it must have credibility with every player. And then, based on these democratic procedures, it's up to the Syrian people to decide on the future form of governance and who their next leader should be.
To continue with Syria, do you have a clear plan for Syria, or are we just being reactive Turkey downs our bomber and we increase our military task force in Syria. When will our operation in Syria be over? What will be the final point of this operation? What is the final goal? And do you think it is possible to resolve the Syrian conflict politically? You mentioned that already, actually.
That was what I was trying to respond to. Number one, we believe it's possible. Number two, we see no other solution to this problem. This is inevitable, and we'll have to do it sooner rather than later. There will be fewer casualties, fewer threats, including for Europe and the US. As now you remember that ISIS penetrated the US, and the law enforcement admitted that the San Bernardino shooting was a terrorist act. So the sooner we do, the better for everyone. 14 people were killed in the San Bernardino shooting. So there's only a political solution. Do we have a plan? Yes, I just laid it out for you. And in the major points, it coincides with the vision proposed by the US. We need first to come together and work on the Constitution, then we need to establish mechanisms of control over the next election, then we have the election, and the election results must be acknowledged. Certainly there are a lot of grievances. Someone likes this group, someone likes another group, someone doesn't want to work with the Syrian government. But certainly everyone needs to find some strength to move towards each other, to meet each other halfway. As for the military operation that Russia is conducting in Syria, as I said, we will support the offensives of the Syrian army. We will continue to do it until the Syrian army needs to conduct those operations. Now, as I said, this was the idea of François Hollande to combine the efforts of the Syrian government army and some parts of the opposition forces against ISIS. So partially, we have been able to do it. We're now in contact with the units of the Syrian opposition, that's armed opposition, that are willing to fight ISIS and are almost doing it, and are practically doing it. And we support their efforts with our bombers, just like we do that when we support the offensives of the Syrian government army. And we can say that the political process has been launched, and the Syrian. So when the Syrian government says that we should lay down the arms and we should start negotiations, well, we don't want to be involved any longer. So the sooner that happens, the better.
Sergei Brylov. I would like to add to what my colleagues from Turkey and Anton said. Do you think it's too late now to talk to Turkey? Is there anything Erdogan might do to fix the situation? This is first. And second, you said we shouldn't be Syrians to a greater extent than Syrians themselves. But since we've increased our task force in Latakia, maybe we should make it a permanent military base in the Middle East.
I don't want to speak on behalf of the heads of the other states. If they feel that it's necessary to do something, it's up to them. We have not seen any steps taken by them. That's it. Now back to your second part. On the military base. You know, we have different opinions on that. Some say in the US, in the EU, that your interests will be taken into account of. That's when they speak to Russia. Do we actually need a military base? What is a military base, now that you think of it? It requires a lot of infrastructure. You need to invest into it. So currently we have Russian aircraft. We have temporary modules where they sleep, where they eat. You know, we can put it all together and go back to our airfields. But a permanent military base, it's a completely different story. Some say we need to have this military base, but I'm not so certain about it. I talked to our European counterparts, and they are telling me, and you want to have a military base. I say, why? They say, you want to keep everything under control. But do we actually need to keep things under control there? So we have not had any intermediary range missiles. We destroyed everything. We only had ground-based ones. The US destroyed their stockpile too. But what about their sea-based and aircraft-based intermediate range missiles? We now have those missiles. So we have the sea-based, which the distance, the range is 1,500 meters, and we also have the aircraft-based ones. The distance is enough to reach the targets that we need. So we need to think about it. Maybe we could stay there for some time, but it's hard for me to say whether it really makes sense to establish a permanent base. We'll think about that.
Коллеги, давайте только уважать друг друга и по одному вопросу, ладно?
Let's just
Чтобы все успели.
limit it to one question per person. Terehov Interfax.
What about Ukraine?
Dайте микрофон,
It's our fraternal nation. And I continue to say that's our brothers.
Спасибо большое за возможность задать вопрос. Хоть мы не турки, мы украинцы.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to ask a question. Even though we're not Turks, we are Ukrainians. Mr. President, you said more than once that there are no Russian military personnel in eastern Ukraine. I would like to say hello to you from Yerofeev and from Tolyatti. Are you going to exchange them for Sentsov, Savchenko, Kolchenko, Klich, and other people? And if possible, my second question, the Minsk agreements are going to expire soon. Neither party has fulfilled their obligations under the Minsk agreement. So what will happen on January 1st? Will you resume your offensive, or will you offer negotiations, or maybe you will forget about Ukraine for a time? Thank you.
As for exchange, we never said that there are no people who might be doing some of the things, including in the military area. But this doesn't mean that there are regular Russian forces. Just please get the difference. You mentioned some of the people, 2 Russians which you want to swap for someone which are here in Russia. And this list that you mentioned of Ukrainians is very long. So any exchange must be an equal one. So you can only swap an equal number of people for an equal number of people there. So certainly we need to talk to our colleagues. We need to listen to what the President of Ukraine says. We need to free people which are detained by both sides. And primarily that refers to the people from the east of Ukraine and the Ukrainian servicemen detained on those territories. But as I said, you can only swap an equal amount of people. It's not a secret that the Ukrainian authorities believe that consider those who've been detained, those people from the southeast,
на Украине, в Киеве,
those who are in jail, they are criminals. They're considered criminals, not worth of swapping. And the people of Donbass disagree with that. We need to use the approach proposed by Petro Poroshenko. Everyone should have the same status. We have a lot of disagreements with the government, with the leadership of Ukraine, but we support Petro Poroshenko's initiative to treat everyone equally. Now, as for January the 1st, the deadline for the Minsk agreements, well, we believe that our economic ties with Ukraine will worsen because we were forced to cancel the free trade zone agreement with Ukraine. Senior leadership of the EU asks me not to exclude Ukraine from this free trade agreement, hoping for the fact that we can sort it out in a trilateral format. They said that we will have negotiations during the year to adjust to those new economic realities. So they said that there will be adjustments made in the form of additional protocols which would alleviate our concerns, the concerns of the Russian Federation about that association agreement between Ukraine and the EU. Something that would ensure our economic interests. Before July, we asked the EU hundreds of times for contacts, and these contacts started only in July. So the first contact started only in July, and they didn't yield any results. We met with the head of the European Commission, we met with the Chancellor of Germany in Paris and discussed this issue. Our goal was to maintain our economic ties with Ukraine, but Ukraine is a member of that free trade zone agreement, and the tariff rate is zero. And Ukraine uses the same technical rules that Russia and other CIS countries are using. And now Ukraine is pulling back from that regime and they want to adopt the European rules and regulations. And it says that all the goods in the Ukrainian market must comply with the technical standards and regulations of the EU. But our goods do not conform to these requirements yet. So what do you do with our goods? Are you going to throw away Russian goods from the Ukrainian market? And it also says that Ukraine has the right to keep both regulations. It has the right, but it doesn't mean that it's going to do it. It just has the right. And the document says that a subcommission could be established. Could be established again. It's not a requirement to establish. And they wanted us to keep all the preferences, all the privileges for Ukraine. It's not rocket science. You don't need to be an expert. It says that our customs rules across the CIS must be conformed and harmonized with the European ones. And I told my counterparts in Paris, you know, we had a long-standing debate with Belarus and Kazakhstan on those rules and regulations. And now, I told my counterparts in Paris, do you want us to change all the rules and regulations in 1 year? It's not possible. It just requires more time. It also says we need to switch to the phytosanitary requirements and standards of the EU. We are ready today to do it. And, even if we can do it, it still takes a lot of time. It takes investment. And it's investment to the tune of tens of billions of dollars. And in Paris, my counterpart said that the European standards are better. Yes, that's true. And we are willing to do it. We need the money. We need investment. And they, as you know, they banned access of Russia to external markets. So they told me they didn't get acquainted with the documents that they sent to us. And I told them, well, you didn't read those documents which you sent to us, and you want us to say yes and sign those documents? Now, we don't want to introduce any sanctions against Ukraine. That's my message. We just switch from a free trade agreement, from a trade regime to a preferential regime. So it means that Ukraine would get the same rules, with the same rights as other countries. What would that mean in practice? It means that currently tariffs are zero in trade between Ukraine and Russia, but the average tariff would be around 6%. It could be 3 in one category of goods, it could be 10 in another category, but it's not our choice. We were fighting against this, but they never... We didn't want to hear our call, and it happened just like I told you. That was their style, that was their tone. But we'll continue to work together, even under the circumstances that we currently see. Now, to be honest, we don't want to exacerbate the conflict. We want to resolve this conflict as soon as possible. But, people, it should not be done at the expense of the people in the east of Ukraine. They should not be destroyed. Now, if you look at the results, election results in the east of Ukraine, the opposition got most of the seats. 43% voted for the opposition in those areas of the Lugansk and Donetsk regions which are controlled by the official Kiev authorities. So we very much hope that Kiev will listen to their call. We very much hope that we will have a straightforward, open dialogue. Everyone's saying, come on, Russia, you need to implement the Minsk agreements. But look at the document. The Ukrainian constitution must be changed and it must be implemented, and also agreed with the people of Donbass. And they also have the law on the special status of Donbass and other regions. So is it on a permanent basis? They said yes. But I'm telling everyone, this law was passed only for 3 years, and 1 year has passed. The European colleagues asked Petro Poroshenko, is that true? He says, yes, that's true. It's only for 3 years. And European counterparts say that this law on the special status must be made on a permanent basis. It was passed by the Ukrainian parliament. And together with the law, they passed Article 10, which says that it will only be implemented after the election. So again, it's been delayed. And so they're telling us, okay, the Minsk agreements call for the passing of that law, and we passed that law. So it's just formal compliance. So we are ready to convince, let's work together. We're ready to convince the people in the southeast of Ukraine so that there's a compromise. We're willing to do it. But it's now up to the Ukrainian counterparts to have the same desire.
Мы про интерфакс говорили.
Interfax.
Здравствуйте. Спасибо. Владимир Владимирович, вот вы только что
Mr.
говорили
Putin,
о значительном расширении военного присутствия.
you just said that Russia stepped up its military presence in Syria. You mentioned the S-400 anti-aircraft defense system, but we are under sanctions. Oil is getting cheaper. We also have an economic crisis on our hands. Will Russia have enough finances for that? Because we need to spend on the increase of the military presence, on the survival. There's so many problems, so many issues, and certainly I don't only mean finances. And you know, sometimes it's easier to start a war than to finish it.
A, we did not start this war. We're just conducting operations using our Air Force, our air defense systems, our intelligence, and this is no serious burden for the budget. Some of the funds we intended to spend on military training and the military exercises. We just channeled these funds into our operation in Syria. We have to add a little bit of money, but this is an insignificant figure for the budget. You know that we have a large-scale military maneuvers. For example, center or east, thousands of personnel, thousands of troops moved from one place to another, hundreds of aircraft used. So we'll just use some of those funds for our operations in Syria. This is the best military exercise you can imagine. So, actually, we can continue this for a long time, and this will be not that much of a burden for our economy. And other issues you mentioned, yes, this is really a problem. I mean, economic issues we face today, but I already told you what we are going to do, and we talked publicly about that. So what can I say? Going back to the economy, like I said earlier, we need import substitution, and it's not an end in itself. We need to modernize our economy, increase our productivity, enhance our business climate, generate demand. This is also an important economic driver. We need a whole number of measures that the government plans, and we will do all that.
As for the new American president, well, we'll have to see who that person would be. But regardless of who is elected, we are willing and we are ready to develop our ties with the US. And the recent visit by the State Secretary indicated that Washington is also ready to move forward to work together with us on points of convergence, on those issues which we can only resolve together. It's a common sense approach. We have supported it. We will support it. We have never tried to isolate ourselves. And it's up to the people of the US to elect the president. Well, it's Washington who's trying to lecture us on who to elect, on what procedures to use. And, you know, it's dangerous. If there's an observer who comes closer to 5 meters to the polling box, then they could be jailed. So it's very dangerous to tell anything to the US people. But we will work with anyone that the American people is going to elect.
Hello, Mr. President. I have two questions. The first question is about Egypt. When will you allow for Russian tourists to visit Egypt? And my second question, 2 days ago, Saudi Arabia said they have a new Islamic alliance. I think this is a Sunni Islamist alliance. And the problem is that this will be an anti-Russian alliance, and what will happen to Shia Muslims now? And Turkey is part of this alliance. So I would like to ask you, what would you say about this new alliance and Egypt?
First, I'll talk about tourism. The decision to restrict travels to Egypt, air passenger traffic to Egypt, were not done due to the fact that we distrust Egyptian leadership. It's not a political decision. All we want is to ensure security and safety for Russian citizens. This is a message to Russians. The regulatory, the law enforcement special services in Egypt are not on par, are not able to match the threat of terrorism. And certainly it's a threat to us, it's a threat to you, it's a threat to Egypt. The president of Egypt, Mr. al-Sisi, is demonstrating courage in fighting this threat, but it takes time to curb these problems. Once we have the mechanisms up and running that would ensure security for Russian citizens, we will ease the restrictions. We're working on that with our Egyptian counterparts. We need to have our representatives at every stage, starting from checking, loading, catering. But certainly the official Egyptian authorities are not to blame. It's our concern, it's our common concern, and we need to find common solutions to these challenges. As for the Islamic military alliance set up in Saudi Arabia, another coalition, we do not think that this coalition will have an anti-Russian bias. Well, we don't treat Turkey as a hostile country to us. They made a hostile act to us, but we don't treat Turkey as a hostile state. And our relations got sour. That's true. I don't see a clear path forward, but the ball is not on our side. The ball is on the Turkish side. But there's also Egypt as part of that coalition and many other countries. Saudi Arabia initiated the establishment of this coalition. We have our differences in terms of resolving the Syria crisis on some of the issues, but there are points of convergence on the Syrian crisis. We are in contact with this country. I met the king of Saudi Arabia. We also have regular meetings at the level of the foreign ministry, at the level of the defense ministry. We're also considering some joint projects in military and technical cooperation. It's worth billions of dollars. So we don't even consider this alliance as anti-Russian. But to effectively resolve the issues that we are facing, I mean, fighting terrorism, we need to combine our efforts. And not to not try to use the resources in different ways. And you know, the US also set up a coalition, and most of the countries are part of that initial coalition. So, and Saudi Arabia is also part of that coalition. So why create a new coalition? The US has this coalition already. Do they have their own plan? Or maybe they have some internal differences. That might be possible. Why? Because there are regional interests at play. There are common interests of fighting terrorism, and there are regional terrorism. Europe is at the receiving end. We saw those horrendous terrorist acts in Paris. Also, the US is facing terrorist acts, like it happened recently when 14 people were killed. We need to come together in fighting terrorist organizations, whatever their name could be, whatever their mottos could be. And I very much hope that this new alliance, the Islamic Military Alliance, will pursue a common interest and will work out effective mechanisms of control, and will be able to work together.